And joining us now is Sal Tocco, the author of this novel, The Cardinal and the Crook. And Sal, I have to start off by saying, my name is James, so I'm not sure how this interview is going to go, because James is the guy who goes a little bit south.
There you go.
And John, turns out you could have made James the good guy, the Cardinal, but we'll talk that offline. With the title, you know, The Cardinal and the Crook, people are wondering, what is the book about?
Okay. The story is about two infants that are abandoned shortly after birth, and they're raised by a kindly Catholic priest, Father Pat. The two brothers, James and John, are identical twins. And one of them is very spiritual and very calm, and eventually decides to follow in his adopted father's footsteps and become a priest. The other brother, James, good heart, wild spirit. And he makes a fateful decision that leads to tragedy. Now, the book starts off with a brother who became a priest learning that he's going to be elevated to a cardinal. And we tell the whole story in a series of flashbacks of events and people that formed this individual into the dynamic leader that he's become. The underlying message is that in our life, tragedy, disappointment is going to happen. And we can allow those hardships to pull us down and make us victims, or we can embrace them with unshakable faith and courage and use them as stepping stones to make us stronger. And that's the story, that's the message.
Incredible. I feel like I could learn so much just by a conversation with you on how the book came about, but yeah. I heard that it was through a conversation with a relative that it did?
This was an elderly relative over 30 years ago, probably almost 40 years ago. We called her Aunt Florence. And she said, you know, back in the late 1800s, we had an ancestor who was a cardinal. I said, really? Yeah, he was a cardinal, and there was a lot of talk about him becoming pope. I said, well, that's amazing. I'm so impressed, wow. Aunt Florence. She said, well, don't get ahead of yourself now. Because in the 20th century, we had this other character, this other ancestor. He was actually in the mafia.
Wow.
I said, wow, the Cardinal and the Crook. That would be an amazing title for a book. I'm going to write a book someday. Life went on. I continued working. We raised the family. And then I retired. COVID hit. That was the time that I wrote the book, The Cardinal and the Crook.
Well, I said I was going to be a millionaire one day, and I never became a millionaire. So you've done much better than I've done. What genre would you say your novel falls under?
I'd say inspirational, Christian, contemporary, family sagas. So I'd put it in that genre.
Amazing. And it seems like you took a lot of care in writing the book, and I heard that you wrote it by hand. I'd love to hear about that process.
I wrote it by hand. My sons would tease me and say, well, that's because you don't know how to type, Dad. But I wrote it by hand. I found that, and you and I talked earlier because you're an artist, by writing by hand, it forced me to think it through, almost as if I was remembering the story.
It's amazing.
And so wrote it all by hand, and then transcribed it, and did several edits to it and revisions to it until it was ready to publish.
That's incredible to me, though, that you did that by hand. Because on the computer, you can change it really easy. Yeah. By hand, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah.
But, so, now this is your first book?
First book.
So, did you take any courses, writing courses, or did you just jump in?
I took an online class of creative writing, and one of the things that stood out for me that the professor said in this online class was, write it as if you're remembering it. He also said, you may start off with a certain outline, you may not follow that outline. So those were some of the things I did beforehand.
And look, here we are. Where can people get the book, either paperback or book?
You can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Apple, Google Books, Barnes & Noble, all online.
Well, Sal, thank you so much. The Cardinal and the Crook. James is okay. We appreciate you being here, and know that we are all going to read this book.
All right. I appreciate that. Thanks for the opportunity.